Hello, class of 2021 of our DSW program and Dr. Tomzak. My name is Jessica, as you guys know, and today I'm going to be presenting to you guys the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Okay, so this act is also known as the Hart-Celler Immigration Bill, and it was named after State Representative Emanuel Celler, who at the time proposed the bill, and Senator Philip Hart of Michigan, who co-sponsored the bill. Okay, so as I said, this bill was enacted, actually signed by Lyndon B. Johnson back in 1975, October 3rd, 1975 to be specific. So if we do a brief recap of what was going on during that time so that we can see how the changes that were made onto the Immigration Act at the time is relevant within what was going on in society at that point. So if we refresh our memories a little bit from 2 weeks ago, this was the time when a lot of components came together when it came to the war on poverty. Okay, so a lot of youth programs came to play. So Job Corps, Neighborhood Youth Corps, a lot of housing programs, HUD. So this is what was happening during that time, okay? So essentially, what Lyndon B. Johnson signed phased out the national origins quota system that was instituted in the immigration law back in 1921. Essentially, there was a quota set for how many immigrants were allowed from each country, mostly European countries, okay? So this marked a new era for mass immigration because at this point, they were no longer only allowing certain numbers from Europe and certain numbers from, as they would say, the Western Hemisphere, but it was pretty much an open door for countries. Yes, there were some limits, however, far beyond the quotas that had been initially set. Okay. And under the old system, admission was largely dependent upon the immigrant's country of birth. So this was a really big deal at the time, okay? So to be specific, 70% of all immigrant slots at the time were allotted for natives of 3 specific countries, okay? The UK, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Germany. However, these slots were often left unused. Okay, so yes, these slots were available for individuals to file for these visas, but they were not being used. So there was a lot of restriction on the number of immigrants that were being allowed into the country, right? At the same time, there was a long wait lists of visas, and not many were being approved from countries like Italy, Greece, Poland, Portugal, and other parts of Europe. Now, we haven't even begun to touch immigration from Latin American countries, okay? Because the number at the time was so small, and I will get to the numbers and how they changed as a result of this new law, okay? So, President Johnson, these were his words when he signed this new law. He goes, this system, referring to the previous system, he says, this system violates the basic principle of American democracy, the principle that values and rewards each man on the basis of his merit as a man. It has been un-American in the highest sense because it has been untrue to the faith that brought thousands of these immigrants, thousands of these shores even before we were a country. So I guess he says, it was counterintuitive to the reason why our country was started to begin with, right? Based on immigration. So at this point, if we look also, right, this was towards the end of World War II. So a lot of these decisions came along with the emotionality of ending World War II and the end of legal discrimination based on an individual's race and ethnicity. Okay, so it was also seen as an extension of the civil rights movement. Okay, a very symbolic one in the sense that it brought a lot of things to light. So there was a new sense of consciousness that was woken up at the end of World War II, and we were like, okay, we need to do things differently. However, there were some in favor and there were some opponents because of the thought of what a great number of new immigrants coming into this country do to our country, to our society. Okay. I'm gonna give you guys some specifics as to what the act called for. Okay, specifically, it established the basic structure of today's immigration law. Okay, so this was a foundation of what we're working with today. And yes, I could have chosen to look into what the immigration law is today. However, I thought it was important to look at this one because it almost looks like we're going back to that. Okay, not that we're going back to it, but that we're taking steps back towards those quotas. So to me, it was important to look at the foundation. Okay, so one of the key points was to abolish the national origins of quota systems. Okay, so these were originally established in 1921. So for many years, we were going by these quotas. For the first time, this act gave preference to relatives and the concept of reunification of families. So there's a two-pronged thing where you could have gotten a visa if you were an expert in your field and that was a way to come into the country, or if you had a relative, and the concept of reunification. Okay, so specifically for the first time, it gave preference to relatives of American citizens and permanent resident aliens, as they use that term, than to applicants of specific job skills. Okay, and there is a breakdown of what a relative is considered, but in the interest of time, I am going to provide you guys with a way to get the original document, okay? And this will be in my references, so that you will see what would constitute as a family member. So for example, an unmarried adult child, that would constitute spouses or children of unmarried sons and daughters to permanent resident aliens, anyone who was married to a U.S. citizen. Okay, so there's a lot of different there were a lot of different pieces that fell under the umbrella of a relative. Okay, so I am going to quickly go through some of the promoters, okay, of some of the supporters of this new law. One of them being our former president, John F. Kennedy, okay, who addressed Congress on July 23rd, 1963. And he referred to the previous law before this was instated as it neither satisfies a national need nor accomplishes an international purpose, meaning the quotas. In an age of interdependence among nations, such a system is an anachronism, for it discriminates amongst applicants for admission into the United States on the basis of accident of birth. Okay? Basically, you don't choose where you are born. So he's saying this does not make much sense to our conscience, right? Subsequently, Edward Kennedy, okay, the chairman of the Senate Immigration Committee, states, "This bill would not flood our cities with immigrants. It will not upset the ethnic mix of our society. It will not relax the standards of admission. It will not cause American workers to lose their job." Okay? However, the opposition had a different point, okay? Republican vice presidential candidate at the time, William Miller, stated, "We estimate that if the president gets his way," meaning Johnson at the time signing this bill, okay, "and the current immigration laws are repealed, the number of immigrants next year will increase threefold, and in subsequent years it will increase even more. Shall we instead look at the situation realistically and begin solving our own unemployment problems before we start tackling the world's?" And we have heard a lot of discussion around this even today as it pertains to immigration. Let's take care of our own first before we open the door to our services, to our resources, to newcomers, right? Which, as Dr. Tomczak mentioned, was the term that was at the time used for this flood of new immigrants, okay? Here's the thing. And we have to look at both sides of the coins, right? The arguments for those opposing it and the arguments for those who were supporting it. Although immigration did not increase as drastically as Representative Miller predicted, they did increase. And by 1968, there was an increase of about 56% in immigration. Okay, so we were talking about annually 290,697 immigrants coming into the country, and an increase to 454,448. Of course, an estimate, but 56% increase, okay, in the entrance of immigrants into the country. Some of the opposition also had, again, it's that similar sentiment of, well, let's take care of our own before inviting others. So Myra Hacker, and she was at the time the president of the New Jersey Coalition, who testified at the Senate Immigration Committee hearing. She stated, "We should remember that people accustomed to such marginal existence," she was referring to immigrants from other countries, "in their own land will tend to live fully here, to hoard our bounteous minimum wages and our humanitarian welfare handouts, lower our wage and living standards, disrupt our cultural patterns. Whatever may be our benevolent intent towards many people, the bill," meaning this bill of 1965, "fails to give due consideration to the economic needs, the cultural traditions, and the public sentiment of the citizens of the United States." Okay, so again, coming out of World War II, let's be inclusive, right? The numbers show that at that point, right, the percentage of immigrants coming from different portions of the world drastically changed. For example, at the time, 86% of immigrants were coming from Europe, and that dropped down to 13. Okay, the immigrants from Asia went from 4% to 39%, and then immigrants from Latin America went from 3% to 43%. Okay, so I haven't exactly looked into what was going on in these countries, especially Latin America, because that's a pretty big change to cause that influx from Latin America, and how come that did not happen before. But those are the numbers, from 3% to 43%. And I like to shed light on that because that is something that we're looking into right now, right? With the kids that are being held at the border, and the wall that they want to consider for Mexico and the U.S. So it's important for me, for my research, it's important to highlight that. Okay. So this act has significantly informed where we stand in our immigration policy. I would be open to knowing what you guys think about where we stand with this. For me, it's important to look at globally. Where is our relationship with these countries? Where does it stand right now? And what has caused the influx of immigration? And yes, although, this is a country of liberties, the Statue of Liberty says, come and be free, and you have the right to be happy in this country as well. It has affected resources, and it's important to look at both sides. Okay, so thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, again, I would love to hear what you guys think about the concept of our resources. Okay, and are we on the side of, is it stripping away from American citizens already? Or is there enough for everyone? And are we just now maximizing and looking at immigrants as resources and positive additions to our country and our culture? Okay? The salad bowl that we are, not necessarily melting pot. Thank you for your time again, and I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.